Well, I'd like to welcome you back to the walk. Obviously, it's been a long time since I've posted anything on this site, so thank you for joining me. My name is Melody Westbrook, and today I want to tell you a little bit about my story. Most of you know I lost my husband a little over 2 months ago. There has been some healing, but days it feels like not a lot. So bear with me today as I just tell you my story. It's unfiltered, it's just my story. I think before I start that one of the reasons as a new widow that it's important to tell my story or any widow to tell their story is because every time we tell our story, it makes it more real to us. One of the things when you lose your husband, especially the way that I did, the shock is unbearable. It's just unbearable. And I am still in shock. I still wake up in the morning looking for him, and he's not there. So listen, please, as I tell you my story of how I lost my sweet husband, Paul Westbrook, on July 13th, 2025. So the day before my husband passed was a Saturday. And I had taken off on a trip by myself up to Wisconsin, the Door County in Wisconsin, and I driven my car. And one of the things that Paul and I loved to do was to play pickleball. And so I was going to go to this pickleball camp, 6 hours each day of some pretty intense lessons. So I left that morning, probably around noon, I guess, to drive up to Door County. And Paul's brother and sister happened to be spending the night that night. And so it was a little kind of crazy, just busy. And they were getting ready to head out the door too to go spend time with their family. And so, the goodbye wasn't anything memorable. It was just goodbye. I'll see you in a couple of days. I love you. So I drove up to Door County on that Saturday. Saturday evening, actually Saturday, as I was driving up to Door County, I called Paul to see how his day was, how the time with his family went, and he just told me story after story after story of just really some fun things for him to do that day with his family. And then obviously I hung up and I went on up and checked into the hotel. So anytime that I'm out of town or Paul's out of town at almost 9 o'clock sharp, pretty much sharp at 9 o'clock, I will get a text from him and it'll say, "Good night, love you," and then all the different emojis that he would put behind that. So Saturday night at 9 o'clock, I got that text from him. Texted back, "Good night." So on Sunday morning, I get up to go to this pickleball camp. I'm super nervous and headed out the door. When I got to the camp, they assessed the paddle I was playing with and recommended another paddle, which I had just bought a brand new paddle. And if any of you know, those paddles are not cheap. So I wanted to buy another paddle. So that afternoon, I had a lunch break for about an hour. I went back to the hotel and then I went for a little bit of a walk. And so I called Paul to ask him if I could have a new paddle. He didn't answer. It's okay. I know he'll call back because anytime he'd see that I'd call, he would always call back. Well, he didn't call back. A little bit of worried, I guess. And then that night, after I got back from the camp, um, I laid down to sleep. And at 9 o'clock, I didn't get that text. And so that evening, I tried to lay down and sleep, and I could already feel the anxiety inside of me of, is he okay? And I just prayed to God to reassure me that everything's okay And I knew that I needed to get some sleep because I had 6 more hours the next day of camp. And so in my mind, I thought, in the morning, he always leaves the house at about 7:27 for work in the morning, and I'll just call him then. Still to call him to ask him if I could have a new paddle. So the next morning, I waited till 7:35 and I called him and he didn't answer. And I knew I was starting to panic then. And so I tried to wait 5 minutes, but I don't think I did. And I called him again, no answer. Then I tried one more time and no answer. Sent him a text, hey, I'm trying to get hold of you. Could you give me a call back? Obviously, he did not respond. So by this time, I knew something was wrong. So I called my sister and I called my cousin and said, "Hey, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but just pray." Okay. In the meantime, after I made those phone calls, I called Ailey Taylor, a pastor's wife, and asked Ailey, "Hey, was Paul at church yesterday?" And she said, "No." She said, "I thought you guys were still out of town." And I said to Ailey, "Something's really wrong. I can't get hold of Paul. I don't know what's happened, and I don't know what to do." And so her husband, our pastor, is a state trooper. And so she said, "Okay, I'm going to get Derek on this, and then I'll let you know." Hung up with her. Okay. So I called my sister again and told her even more that he was not at church yesterday, and that's terribly unusual. And so my sister stayed on the line with me. She said, "Don't hang up. I want you to go get your things. I want you to start packing and just stay with me." And so I did. I'm just, the anxiety was huge, and trying to think and trying to pack as quickly as I could. And at some point, I don't know if I was on the phone with Ailey or my sister, but I pulled up from our cameras outside. I pulled up to see if there was any footage on that of Paul. Now remember, this is now Monday morning. So I found some footage from him at 8:12, 8:13, 8:14 a.m. And I could see that he'd gotten back from his bike ride, which he typically did every morning. And he walked in his circles like he always walks, trying to get his breath, all the things that I have typically seen him do. But then I realized there was no other camera notification. And so my worries were getting even worse. And so, again, whoever I was on the phone with, I don't really remember. I said, I have a camera in my garage too. So let me pull that app up. So I pulled that app up, and immediately I could see that his car was in there. I could see that the garage door was open. And so I looked down, and on the app, it'll tell how long the garage door has been opened or closed. And I could see uh, that door had been open for 23 hours. And I knew immediately that something was very, very wrong. Not long after that, um, Ailey called me. And it's a call I will never forget. And again, understand, I'm up here all by myself. There's nobody with me that I know. So Ailey calls, and the first words out of her mouth was, "He's gone." And I screamed, "No, he can't be gone." And she said, "Melody, yes, honey, he's dead." Devastated, crying, screaming in that hotel room with nobody there with me. God, what do I do? What do I do? My husband's dead. I gotta call my boys. All these things were running through my mind. but I knew I had to get to an airport as soon as possible. So I stepped out of my hotel, still in massive shock, and I walked up to the hotel manager. I was crying really hard, and I told her what had happened. Of course, she was shocked and so incredibly kind. I believe that God put angels along the way for me, to take care of me. And she said, "Okay, honey, we're going to take care of you. We're going to figure this out." She took me back into a room, got me a bottle of water, had me to sit for just a little bit. But I knew I had to make some horrendous phone calls. So as I was making those calls, called my youngest son Joshua because he was the only one in the United States at that time. Luke was in Barcelona, and Caleb and Elena were in El Salvador. So I told Joshua, and it was kind of weird because by this time it was probably about 8:30 in the morning, I guess, on Monday, and I called Joshua, and he's military, and so he answered immediately, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. But he stepped out of his wherever he was, and I was able to tell him. And the shock, to hear my youngest son's voice was horrendous. But immediately he took over. And I think this is all his military training. He's been trained on how to direct people in trauma and chaos. He says, "Mama, I've got this. I want you to hang up, and I'm going to start making phone calls, and we're going to get you a flight out." I said, "Okay." So I hung up the phone. I went back out to the hotel manager, and I just was crying. I said, I have to get to the airport. How do I get to the airport? I said, "I can't drive. My car's here. I can't drive." And she said, "We've already got it taken care of, hon." They'd called a cab driver. He was on his way. And in the meantime, Joshua was able to book me a flight out of Green Bay, with American Airlines. So I'm shaking, needless to say, trying the best to get things brought out to them, my luggage, and bags of things, because I was just throwing things in bags. And so we put the guys put the bags in the back of my car, put the suitcases in. And as I turned to get into the cab, the hotel manager and some other young man, I guess he worked there, both said, "Can we give you a hug?" And that was probably so, so impacting to me. Perfect strangers hugging me and letting me cry. And I told them I'm lost. I can't make any decisions. So I started to get into the back of the cab, and this cab was an older man, and he said, "Sweetheart, no, you sit up here with me. We're gonna get you taken care of." And I just remember those things and those moments of these strangers just saying, "We've got you. We know you can't process this, so we're going to get you exactly where you need to go." So on the way to Green Bay, which is about an hour away, I'm often on the phone with Joshua, and he said, "Mama, I want you to know I've called the airport. Green Bay Airport is extremely small. And I've told them what you look like. I've told them what happens. I've told them your name. And they assured me that they were going to take really good care of you." Okay. And the cab driver, as we're driving, he said, "I want you to know if we can't find you a good flight out of Green Bay, I will drive you all the way to Milwaukee." Just people taking care of me that didn't even know me. So we arrived at the Green Bay airport, and the cab driver got all my stuff out, made sure I was okay, took it into the airport, connected me with American Airlines agent, and looked at me, said, "Are you okay? Is it okay for me to go?" And I said, Okay, yeah, that's fine. So the American Airlines agent then took over, and the flight that they were only flight that they could get through American was leaving out at 3 o'clock. This was 10 o'clock in the morning. I knew there's no way I could sit in an airport for 5 hours. I had to get home. So the American airline agent walked me over to the Delta agent and said, "Can we find her a flight home sooner than 3 p.m.?" So two women there, and they began to work on it, and one on the computer. And she says, "I'm going to find you something. But honey, in the meantime, we need for you to sit down." I remember they sat me down on the weight on the scale. It's like, oh gee, hopefully nobody can see how much I weigh. And so the other gal, because I commented on that, said, "No worries, I got this taken care of." She grabbed a post-it note and she put it over so nobody could see how much I weighed. And she was younger. She walked around and she asked me probably the most impacting question that anybody could ask. She said, "Tell me about your husband. Just tell me about him. What was his name?" So I proceeded to tell her. I said he was a pastor for years and we resigned and was working somewhere else. And then I just started crying and I said, "We were just planning our trip to South America after he retires in February, because I told Paul the day after you turn 65, you're done and you're mine." And so Paul and I had been planning that trip the week prior to all of this happening. We were in Myrtle Beach together. And I'll never forget, this young lady looked at me and she said, "You're going to South America." She said, you have kids?" "Yeah, I have 3 boys and they're all married to wonderful wives." And she said, "You're going to take your kids to South America." I'll never forget that, because a stranger cared so much for me. So they got me on my way. They found me a flight at 12:30, and as I was leaving there to go through the gate, both women came around and just gave me a big hug and just let me cry as hard as I needed to cry. And so I went through the gate, and it was so interesting that they had called ahead to the people working at the gate and said, "This lady's coming in." They told them what happened. "This is what she looks like, and this is her name." And so when I got to the gate, the lady standing there was very aware. She made sure I was okay. She said, "Do you need anything?" And I said, "I just need a box of Kleenex." And so she went and bought me a box, or got me a box of Kleenex. And so when the plane arrived and they opened the doors, she looked at me and she said, "You're getting on first, honey. We're going to get you in. We're going to get you settled. And we're going to make sure that you're okay." Again, she gave me a hug. "Can I hug you?" "Yes. Yes, please." The flight attendants, they knew, and they took care of me, gave me a hug too, made sure I was comfortable. So I was finally on a flight flying home. I had to go through Detroit and finally landed in St. Louis. I don't know what time it was. Paul's family was there to greet me. Just kind of fell in my sister-in-law's arms and just started to wail, cry hard, because I'd held it as best I could together. Those poor people on that plane probably didn't know what in the world was going on with me. And so my youngest son and his wife were flying in from North Carolina about an hour after I arrived. So we stayed there and greeted greeted Sarah and Joshua as they came through. And it's never felt so good to hug one of my children. Took such incredible care of me. So I knew I could not spend the night at my house that night. Um, so I went to my sweet friend Margaret's house with Joshua and Sarah. They let me stay the night. Sarah and Joshua and I all slept in the same bed together. I tell kind of a funny story is Sarah was sleeping next to me and I wasn't sleeping much. And throughout the night, she kept patting me and saying, I love you. I love you. And that morning I said, thanks for doing that, honey. I said, that helped me through the night. And she goes, what did I do? And I said, well, you kept patting me, telling me that you love me. She goes, I did? I said, yeah, you did. So, not much sleep that night, needless to say. I looked over at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and Joshua wasn't in the bed anymore. So I got up and noticed he was in the bathroom, um, crying. And I said, hey, how about we go sit outside together? And Margaret and her husband Chris live on a beautiful lake, um, in a beautiful setting. So Joshua and I sat out and talked from probably 5 in the morning to, I don't know, maybe 9. Um, and I will never forget that moment with my son. But then I knew that I needed to go to the house. Um, I know I didn't have to, but I just felt as though I needed to go to the house and start this horrific nightmare of a journey. So, my sweet Margaret, I got in the car with her and she drove me over. Joshua and Sarah were in a different car going. My sister and my cousin were there and they went also. And so drove up, and I knew I had a journey through this. One of the things that I found out as time was going on was that he had died a Sunday morning. I remember I said I saw him on the video at 8:11, 8:12, 8:13. And I would guess probably maybe 10 minutes after I saw him, he went and sat on our favorite place to sit on our front porch on the bench. And apparently he laid his head back and he died. So my pastor, Derek, who again was a state trooper, he's the one that found him. And he told me later, he said, Melody, he did not struggle at all. He said his arm was still on the back of the bench. His cell phone had been in his hand and it just kind of slid out. He said it looked like he had just fallen asleep. So his body had been out there for 24 hours. But Derek said he looked just like Paul. And that, in and of itself, obviously gives me a lot of peace that my husband didn't suffer. He just fell asleep and he woke up with Jesus. So, more details. My Caleb and Elena, my oldest, and my grandbabies flew in. I can't remember if they were the next night, Wednesday. And then I think Luke and Lauren flew in from Barcelona on Thursday. So obviously, we go to the airport, and those greetings were very difficult. But I watched my boys and my daughter in laws, who are amazing, just took over. And they made decisions for me that I couldn't make. They just took really good care of me. So that's basically the story. of how my husband died. We don't know specifically. We assume that it was his heart. He had had a pacemaker and he had, some heart issues, but not anything huge. So we just assume it was something with his heart. And truth of the matter is, we will never know. But again, I think it's important for me to tell you my story, because as I tell my story again, it becomes real. And throughout this whole process, I've connected with other widows, um, friends of mine, and just reached out. And what I've realized is that for them, it's important for them to tell their story too. So my encouragement to you is, whenever you meet a widow or someone that your friend lost their husband, just listen to their story. And they're probably going to tell you that story a whole bunch of times. There are often times I've sat down with friends and I start to tell a story and I'm like, I think I've already told you this. My sweet cousin Esther, I sat with her and started to tell her my story, caught myself and said, I think I've told you this story. And she smiled and looked at me. She goes, yes, you have. But please tell me that again. So that's tonight. What I want you to hear is that it's important for us to tell the story as many times as we need to make that story real, to help pull us out of the shock that we're in, and to know that this really happened. So that's about all I'm going to tell you this evening. Hopefully you got something from it. But there's other things throughout the next few weeks. I don't know how long I'll go on this. Then I want to talk to you about things that us as widows go through that I had no idea. I didn't know, but now I know. So if you want, hopefully next week I'll be able to do another video and talk about things like lack of sleep, lack of eating, the anxiety that's within us, the shock that I still have. I still have the shock. But these are real things that we go through. So thanks for joining me this evening. And again, hopefully, this will help you some when you meet someone who has lost their husband. Thanks for joining me.